Thank you all for coming. I want to welcome you all. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Rod. Randy was my father. But I realize Randy was also a father in many ways to many of you here. He was a father by kindness and by supporting the dreams and careers and causes of many, sometimes more than their own fathers would or could. He was a stepfather and a loving grandfather. So there's a whole lot of fathering going on here. And if that applies to any of you, you are my brothers and sisters today. And that entitles you to one free hug. So anyone who knows Randy knows that he would have growled at us for heaping praises upon him, but he can't do anything about it now, so we're going to do it anyway. Several of today's speakers will tell you about Randy's fight for freedom, as Les and Richard already have through his work with the Smith Richardson Foundation. I, however, want to tell you about something very few people know. In fact, some of this stuff almost nobody knows. Something he rarely talked about. Some stories from his first fight for freedom during World War II, a powerful experience that shaped his thinking, that made him the perfect man for his second fight for freedom. Randy dropped out of high school to join the Army. He served as a private in Easy Company, 2nd Division, 38th Regiment. Randy entered the fight as a replacement probably just before December 11th, when the 2nd Division was ordered to attack the Roar River dams, just a few days before the Battle of the Bulge. After 5 days of heavy fighting, the temperature dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and it stayed there for months. Suddenly, the Germans launched a massive counterattack, the Ardennes Offensive. 2nd Division dug in at a place called Elsenborn Crest, a good defensive position, but also, it turned out, a critical German objective controlling the road to Antwerp. The ground was frozen so hard that they had to use dynamite to dig foxholes. For the next 10 days, Randy's division held their ground in some of the heaviest fighting of the war, their foxholes repeatedly overrun by elite Waffen-SS, including Hitler's favorite, the 12th SS Panzer Division called Hitlerjugend, which means Hitler Youth. It was comprised of Hitler Youth who'd been trained all their lives to run these tanks. They were spearheading the attack on the ridge. Artillery rained down on them from all sides for 10 days. In fact, the 2nd Division repeatedly called in strikes on their own positions, hoping that since they were in the foxholes and the Germans were exposed, more Germans would be killed than Americans. Bolstered by a last-minute delivery of bazookas and anti-tank weaponry, they held the line at Elsenborn Crest day after bloody day. They were the one and only regiment of the Allied front line that did not break. Those men with Randy at their side, they halted the most elite German forces and turned the tide of the Battle of the Bulge. Historian John Eisenhower, the son of President Eisenhower, said the action at Elsenborn was the most decisive of the Ardennes campaign. After the battle, Randy was hospitalized briefly in France with a horrible combination of trench foot and frostbite, after being soaked and frozen for more than 2 weeks in continuous combat. His feet never fully recovered, causing him pain in later years. But Randy never told anyone about the remarkable details of this battle. He never once mentioned the word Elsenborn to anyone. I did not know myself until I researched it 2 weeks ago. Randy always played down the Battle of the Bulge, not mentioning any of the accomplishments of his division there. So this was the start of Randy's famous modesty, his reticence and unwillingness to talk about his accomplishments. So let's think about this experience for a minute, because it is key to his character. These guys were the only part of the entire Allied army to hold the line in the Battle of the Bulge. They are heroes. Decisively defeating the elite Waffen-SS has got to have given them amazing self-confidence that would last for the rest of their lives. But maybe they did not feel like heroes. We can only speculate, but perhaps for Randy, the Battle of the Bulge was a terrifying, miserable, bloody, near-death experience that he did not even want to think about or relive at all. That is a common feeling among World War II vets. I was not a hero, but I served in a company of heroes, they say. But Randy was not done learning lessons about humility and the rewards of good service. Rejoining the attack into the heart of Germany, Randy marched from battle to battle, advancing, attacking constantly, carrying a 40-pound machine gun on his back, wet, filthy, frozen, feet aching, without any real break for months on end. Randy sometimes told a story about marching into a German village on a cold, rain-soaked night, sleepless for 36 hours of marching and fighting, marching and fighting. When his commander called a halt, Randy staggered over to sit on a low stone wall. But the rain and the mud, with a heavy machine gun on his back, made him slip, and he fell over the wall, straight into a huge pile of rain-soaked manure, piled high by some farmer to fertilize his fields. So far from being covered in glory, Randy was covered, head to toe, in dung. Baths were hard to come by, and Randy did not get to shower for the next month. But he said it was not so bad when the weather dropped below freezing, as it did much of that season, for his uniform and the manure would seize into a solid, odorless mass. The real problem came when Easy Company found a warm house to shelter in for the night. As his uniform started to thaw, a powerful stink would arise, soon to be followed by a general cry, "Richardson, get out!" Randy learned a tough lesson at 19. The reward for victory, for overcoming muck and misery and horror and battle, is often more muck, misery, horror, and battle. No wonder he never bragged. Humility and self-confidence are a powerful combination. They made Randy into a regular guy. All his life, he never acted like a rich man's son or a war hero, but like a regular Joe. Many people think Randy was a conservative, and he was more or less, but that is not entirely true. But that's perhaps the subject of a different talk. But I'll say this. He also had a strong egalitarian and humanitarian streak, stemming from his World War II experience. Few people know this, but Randy served proudly in one of the first desegregated divisions of the U.S. Army and was right there at the moment of desegregation. As Randy tells it, it all began one day in March 1945 when he got a lucky ride in a Jeep on account of his injured feet, which seemed like a good idea until his ride got blown sky high by a German 88 round, leaving Randy sprawled in a ditch. When Randy looked up, black soldiers were fleeing all around him. You see, segregated all-black platoons with white officers were a recent political creation from Washington, a compromise between civil rights leaders and racist Southern Democrats opposed to integration. The Germans had targeted an all-black platoon in the 2nd Division, knowing that the segregated troops were often less well-trained, had worse morale, and would break first, leaving a hole in the line the Germans could exploit. White platoons distrusted the black platoons on this account and would near mutiny if asked to serve side by side on the line. The officers of the 2nd Division, however, realized that segregation was breeding both distrust among whites and low self-confidence among blacks, so destroying the morale and unit cohesion of both black and white platoons. Segregation was no way to create a band of brothers. That night, as Randy tells it, a revolution occurred on the battlefield as junior officers decided to integrate all platoons, assigning 3 to 4 black soldiers to each white platoon. A few weeks later, on a dark, cold night on the outskirts of Leipzig, Easy Company found itself pinned down, hiding in the shallow rows of a newly plowed field. Germans were firing blindly in the dark, tracer bullets flying just inches above the small dirt mounds, offering scant protection. 2 black soldiers, grazed by stray bullets, did not cry out, did not betray the position. After that, Randy knew that integration had worked, and Easy Company remained, as always, a band of brothers. So decades before the 1960 civil rights movement, Randy became an enemy of segregation on the sensible grounds that it weakens the nation and breeds distrust. The battle to liberate Leipzig was tough for Randy in the 2nd Division. It was a fierce urban combat in which fighting was often house to house and block to block, often against fanatical Hitler youth who refused to surrender and would fight to the death. Randy saw some terrible things during that battle. He never spoke about it, but during that action, the 2nd Division liberated a death camp masquerading as a psychiatric unit. In that place, 15,000 Jews had been murdered. They liberated 2 other concentration camps, one in which Americans found the bodies of 600 women massacred by the fleeing Nazis. Whatever Randy saw, the liberation of Leipzig cost Randy something dear. All his life, Randy would carry a special fondness for the peoples he had liberated. He loved German and Eastern European peasant culture and food all his life. To the shock of his nieces and nephews, dishes like tripe and pig's knuckles were delicacies to him. I think his fondness for these people may even have played a role in the fact that 2 of the fine women he married had German and Jewish blood. After the war, Randy's unit helped block the Soviet advance in Czechoslovakia, an experience which would shape his future anti-communist views. Randy related how his unit witnessed Soviet trucks hunting defectors on roads teeming with traumatized refugees, gunning down anyone deemed not a German POW, since POWs had a right to return home under the rules of war. In practice, the Soviets defined defector as anyone who did not speak High German. So, wrong accent, they shoot you. Soviet soldiers would fire at American sentries, Randy said, in order to force entry into the American sector to hunt down defectors. Randy used to tell how his commander ended that practice, standing sentry duty himself without insignia. When the Soviets got to the part where they were about to shoot a ring of bullets around his feet, he waved down the road and some lorries pulled aside. The Soviets found themselves staring down the barrel of a howitzer. The commander told them to turn their trucks around, and if they ever returned, he would not hesitate to blow their trucks out of the road. That ended that. The lives of many refugees were saved that day, and Randy learned a lesson about totalitarian thugs and how to stop them, which he would never, ever forget. Having already liberated Western Europe, liberating Eastern Europe and saving those millions of innocent suffering people now became Randy's new mission. Like his commander, General Patton, Randy did not like to leave a job half done. One can only imagine how devastated Randy felt when he learned that half the area he fought to liberate, including Eastern Germany and the hard-won city of Leipzig, and Western Czechoslovakia, were suddenly turned over to the Red Army in July of 1945 by the agreement at Yalta. He fought and suffered, and his brothers bled and died to free these people from one murderous tyrant only so they could be enslaved by another. If you don't think that burned, consider this. Roger Kaplan wrote to me that at his first meeting with Randy in the early 70s for a job interview for a new position at SRF as the Smith Richardson Foundation's first foreign policy program officer, Randy's very first question was, "What do you think of what they did at Yalta?" Randy helped liberate millions. He helped save the lives of millions. And he did so not once, not twice, but many times the world over. Everyone in this room is probably freer and more prosperous because of the amazing things that Randy helped to accomplish. Randy did good things for everybody here, and he wished good things for everybody here. And that should bring us all together. Finally, I have to thank the eloquent Roger Kaplan for writing these words about Dad. He was made of the elements, and with the temper and courage and the stubborn insistence on sticking to what matters and what endures, that made our country free. Thank you all for coming today.